Google is putting out a new product which has us glasses with a small computer on it, which keeps you on the internet 24 hours a day, but it also has a camera and a recording device. So everything that's going on around you gets put up on the internet.
Scary.
And the guy who founded Google, Eric Schmidt, was asked by a reporter if he didn't think this was an invasion of privacy. And he said, if you're doing something that you don't want to be on the internet, you shouldn't be doing it. In other words, everything ought to be on the internet.
Right.
So,
What an argument.
That's actually like very, very close to what I want to ask you today.
Pardon?
It's actually very close to what I want to ask you today.
oh, okay.
We're going to ask 3 questions. We know we don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to ask you one, Heather will ask you one, and Heather will ask you one.
Okay.
My name is Ilya. I emailed you. Your quote is saying that the USA is the freest country in the world in a 2008 interview with Vincent Navarro, and many indices back your statement up. But a few days ago, as we all know, the NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden revealed that NSA is secretly monitoring virtually every online action that goes through US servers, of not only US citizens, but anyone on the planet who goes through US servers. So is the USA truly the freest country in the world? And is there any practical solution to regaining our privacy? And or is this a reality we have to deal with in a rapidly advancing technological age that we live in today?
Well, by comparative standards, in many respects, it's still the freest country in the world, but this is a completely intolerable invasion of personal space and personal privacy. It's not new. I mean, it's reaching new heights, but as more technology develops, repressive systems like governments use the technology for their own purposes. In the case of the government, it's control of the population, but commercial institutions use it too. I mean, if you buy things online, say, and you do it regularly, the companies that you buy it from keep a record of what you're doing and keep data about you and try to direct you to the things that they want you to do. And they have a tremendous amount of information on the NSA, a lot. And you find that if you look something up on Google, or if you buy a book from Amazon or whatever, they're taking information about you. And the governments are doing it too. And it shouldn't be done. There should be a space for personal life, and it's being invaded. And the doctrine that lies behind it is pretty much what Eric Schmidt said. And there hasn't been a study of this yet, but you probably know more than I do, but my impression is that there's a generational difference in reaction to this, that younger people are less offended by it than older people. Because younger people there's a new, especially younger people in your kind of generation, accessibility to technology and degree of privilege and so on, are living in a kind of an exhibitionist culture where people just put things up on, the things that people put up on Facebook. I don't think you could have imagined a generation ago that nobody would do it, But it's now just becoming part of life. Everybody's supposed to know everything you do. And the sense of the necessity to inform people of everything that's happening is astonishing. I mean, you walk around campus, half the kids are talking on the cell phone because you have to keep it in contact with people all the time. I mean, in Boston, where over the winter there was an epidemic. The medical profession was trying to figure it out. It was just among young girls, teenage girls. And when they finally figured it out, it turned out it was coming from fatigue. And the reason for the fatigue is they weren't sleeping. And they weren't sleeping because they took their cell phones to bed with them. So in case somebody called at 3 o'clock in the morning, to say, I'm walking across the street, the friend is walking across the street. I mean, it's just a different mentality. And I suspect it may lead to support for invasions of privacy. which would be very unfortunate, I think. But the concept of a private life is declining under the impact of new technologies, and it ought to be defended.
Thank you.
Heather, do you want to ask your question first?
Mine is sort of about relating to the educational system. Basically, you've spoken about the concept of indoctrination of the United States educational system, and that student debt is a device, and studying and teaching are done for the test. Considering the shortcomings of American education in general, what responsibility do you think that graduates from universities like AUB have?
What
responsibility?
Responsibility.
Right.
Same responsibility as everyone else. To commit yourself to doing the kind of things that you think are right and just. People who are graduating from a university like AUB have unique responsibilities only because they have unique privilege. Privilege confers responsibility. The more privilege you have, the more options you have, the more responsibility you have. And college graduates from a good university like this have plenty of privilege, plenty of options, choices about what to do. As far as the indoctrination is concerned, I should say that that's actually not my word. I borrowed it from the liberal critique of institutions. Mm-hmm. If you go back to, there was a strong reaction against the activism of the 1960s. The 60s was a kind of a liberatory period. It just opened a lot of things up, a lot of freedom, a lot of democracy, a lot of participation in the public sphere. And that caused a lot of fear and concern among elites across the spectrum. And towards the liberal end, it was expressed in an important book called The Crisis of Democracy, which basically held that there's too much democracy, we've got to restrain it. And one of the things they were concerned with, this was a professor at Harvard, that he said there was a failure of what he called the institutions responsible for the indoctrination of the young. Mm-hmm. The young have to be better indoctrinated in schools and colleges and churches and all the rest of the institutions which are responsible for indoctrination of the young. And that's it's not often said like this clearly as that. This really wasn't meant for public distribution, talking to each other, but it's the basic conception. It goes way back. It goes back to, it's really as far as it can go, but in modern history it goes back to the first democratic revolution in England in the 1640s, 17th century. There was a civil war between the Parliament and the King, but meanwhile the country had just become freer, and there were a lot of itinerant speakers, lecturers, ministers, and so on, distributing pamphlets. A lot of them were pretty radical. And there were some very radical movements developing, levelers, diggers, and others. And this really was very frightened the privileged sectors, the people who call themselves the men of best quality, the gentry. And they were appalled by the fact, as they put it, that people are saying, we don't want to be ruled by king or parliament. We don't want any party or civil war. But we want to be governed by countrymen like ourselves who know the people's wants, not by knights and gentlemen who oppress us. And that's frightening. You can't allow that kind of thing to happen. And the whole history of democratic society since then is an attempt to repress it. It's in the Constitution, and it goes right up to the things we were just talking about. The idea that people should be free and control their own affairs and so on, that's a really frightening idea. So you have to have indoctrination of the young. What can you do about it? Well, just what people have been doing for centuries. There is an increase in freedom. It didn't come from a gift. It came from struggle.
To steer away from that to study of language, can you elaborate on any existing link between your political activities and your scientific activities?
Connection.
To the best of my knowledge, language acquisition's innateness and lack of cultural role is emphasized in the study of language. How can you compare that with your political views?
It's unrelated.
It's unrelated.
It's like supposing the field I was working in, let's say vision instead of language. Well, what you just said is true of vision. The nature of our visual system is determined in large part by genetic factors. So we have a mammalian visual system and not an insect visual system. We have certain visual illusions that we can't help happen. So if you look at the moon illusion, say if you look at the moon, when it's rising it looks bigger than when it's up in the sky. You know it isn't, but that's the way it looks. Now that's the way the visual system operates, and in many other ways. And it's constrained by your genetic nature. So if you're interested in understanding the way the world works, you say that. That's completely independent of your political views. It's fact about humans. We're not angels. We're organic creatures. And organic creatures have fixed biological endowment, which provides a certain scope for what they can do, but imposes limits on what they can do.
If we were to say that with neuroscience and cognitive science currently gaining more prominence, what are your expectations for linguistic research and the field at large in the future?
Well, there are expectations and there are hopes, just like in the political arena. Expectations are pretty dim, frankly. I think there's strong developments that are leading to kind of a vulgarization of research, studying insignificant things, and, building bulldozers instead of trying to understand things. But there's still possibilities of doing serious work aimed at understanding. I mean, in the cognitive sciences, the real question, the fundamental question is, do you want to try to understand what's happening, or do you want to just build models which are more or less similar to what's observed? And so, for example, it's as if you were asking in physics, do we want to understand what's going on outside the window, or do we want to just be able to predict what's going to be happening outside the window? If you just want to predict what's happening outside the window, you can forget about physics. They can't tell you anything. But what you should do is take endless numbers of videotapes of what's going on and then do a statistical analysis of them, and you get a pretty prediction of what will happen next. It's intellectually worthless, but it would give you a fair prediction of that. On the other hand, if you go to the physics department, they can't tell you anything about it, but they're trying to understand what lies behind it. And the same is true in cognitive science. If your goal is to have a translation program that Google can market and will more or less work, the way to do it is by brute force, without understanding anything. If you want to try to understand how people create expressions that articulate what their thoughts are, well, you don't do that, you do something else. And the question is which prevails. There's a lot of pressure towards the bulldozer, I'll tell you. If you want funding from the National Science Foundation, that's probably what you would do.
Very good. Thank you so much. I know you guys are tight on time, so we really appreciate you meeting with us.
Really, thanks.
Yeah.